The forest went silent, and then something started knocking in patterns. The silence arrived first, not as an absence but as a pressure. It settled over the clearing the way cold settles into bone, gradual and then undeniable. The insects cut off mid-cycle. Wind stilled between breaths. Even the creek beyond the tree line seemed to swallow its own movement, water locking in place as if embarrassed to be heard. We stood there listening to nothing. Our headlamps carved narrow cones through the dark, beams jittering as our hands betrayed us. The cold air smelled sharper than it had an hour earlier. Resin and damp leaf mold tightened into something metallic. My exhale fogged and lingered longer than it should have, drifting sideways, as if pulled. That was when the knocking began. 3 taps. A pause. 2 taps. Another pause longer. Then 1. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The sound carried with impossible clarity. A clean, wooden report that echoed once, and then seemed to fold inward, absorbed by the trunks around us. It came from somewhere deeper than our lights reached, somewhere behind the wall of blackened spruce where shadows stacked thick and vertical. "Branch?" someone whispered. No one moved to test the theory. The pattern repeated. 3, 2, 1. The forest didn't answer with its usual noises. No settling bark, no startled bird. The trees held still, as if listening with us. The silence between the knocks was exact, measured. Not the uneven spacing of something falling or swinging loose, but the deliberate restraint of a metronome counting time. I checked my watch without knowing why. The second hand ticked. The pauses matched it too closely. The cold deepened, slipping under collars, finding wrists. Shadows shifted where there was no wind, elongating across the forest floor in slow, thoughtful motions. Our lights caught movement that vanished the instant we tried to focus on it, like the dark itself was adjusting. Another set of knocks, closer now. 3, 2, 1. The sound seemed to come from multiple directions at once, as if the trees were passing it along, trunk to trunk. When it echoed, the echo answered too cleanly, no distortion, no decay. Like a reply rather than a reflection. We backed toward the tents. The ground felt wrong beneath our boots, softer, as if the forest floor had been turned over while we weren't looking. Roots rose where there had been none, pale and knuckled, forming subtle ridges that caught at our steps. The trees leaned, not toward the sound, but toward us. This time the pattern changed. 3, 3, 2. The pause stretched. The silence pressed harder. I felt it then, the awareness. Not a presence exactly, but a weight of attention. The way a room feels when someone stops pretending they aren't watching you. The knocking resumed, slower now, patient. Each tap landed with the certainty of intent, as if testing our response. "Don't answer," someone breathed. A branch bent overhead with a sound like a joint popping. The canopy closed a little more, swallowing starlight. Our headlamps dimmed without flicker, beams shrinking as though the dark were drinking them. The pattern repeated again. 3, 3, 2. It matched something I couldn't quite place, an arrangement that tugged at memory. My chest tightened with the sense that if I understood it fully, something would understand me back. We tried to leave. The trail had shifted. Where it should have curved right, it ran straight into a stand of trees too dense to pass. Another path opened to the left, fresh and bare, soil exposed as if recently pressed. The knocking came from that direction now. 3, 3, 2. A final tap followed, late, almost shy. The forest leaned in. Shadows pooled at our feet, climbing ankles, knees, the hems of our jackets. The trees creaked, not from wind but from adjustment, roots shifting, bark flexing. Somewhere close, something knocked once more. Right behind us. I realized then what the pattern was doing. Not speaking, not signaling, but waiting, counting. The silence returned, heavier than before, and in it, I heard my own heartbeat answer back, perfectly in time. We found footprints that changed shape the deeper we followed them. The first set lay just beyond the firelight, pressed into a skin of damp soil that still held the day's warmth. They were ordinary enough, boot-shaped, heel-first, the tread softened by leaf rot and rain. Someone had walked through here recently. That alone would have been unsettling this deep in the forest, miles from the nearest road, but not enough to stop us. The forest had gone quiet in that way it only does late at night, when sound doesn't fade so much as withdraw. Our breaths sounded too loud. The fog moving between the trunks made no noise at all, drifting in ribbons that caught our headlamps and blurred them into halos. Somewhere far off, an echo repeated itself once, twice, then stopped, as if it had realized it wasn't supposed to be there. We followed the footprints because they were the only sign of direction. The trail we'd used to come in had dissolved behind us, swallowed by ferns that hadn't been there an hour earlier. When we tried to backtrack, the ground rose and dipped in unfamiliar ways, roots surfacing like knuckles under skin. The prints, at least, were consistent. They went forward. The soil grew wetter the deeper we went. Each step made a soft, sucking sound, the earth reluctant to let go. The footprints led us into a stand of old trees where the trunks were wider than doorways and leaned toward each other at angles that felt wrong, like people in a conversation they didn't want us to hear. Moss coated everything, thick and dark, absorbing light. The air smelled of iron and cold water. That was when we noticed the change. The next print was longer than the last. Not by much, just enough that it didn't quite match the stride we'd been measuring in our heads. The toe dragged a little, the front of the impression tapering into something narrower, less rounded. We told ourselves it was the slope, the mud, the way wet ground lies. A few steps later, the heel looked thinner. We stopped, lights trained on the ground. Fog slid around our ankles, cool and deliberate. When we shifted, it shifted too, parting to make room. The silence pressed closer, thick enough to feel against the ears. "Someone's messing with us," one of us said, but there was no conviction in it. The prints continued. With each one, the shape grew subtly wrong. The arch lifted unnaturally high. The toes separated, the impressions deeper, as if more weight had settled on fewer points. The stride lengthened, then shortened, then lengthened again like it was testing distances. We started walking slower. So did the footprints. The forest responded in small ways. Branches creaked without wind. A tree ahead of us bent slightly, not falling, just inclining, its canopy blocking a sliver of starlight that hadn't been blocked before. When we tried to step off the path to get a better look, the ground dipped sharply, forcing us back into line. The fog thickened behind us, erasing where we'd been. The next print had a joint where a toe shouldn't have one. It wasn't a dramatic change. No claws yet, no monstrous exaggeration. Just an extra bend, pressed into the mud with careful clarity. The soil around it was undisturbed, as if the foot had paused there, testing its own shape. We argued in whispers, about turning back, about staying together, about whether we were imagining it. The echoes of our voices came back to us wrong, delayed by half a second, stretched thin, repeating syllables out of order. It sounded like someone else was practicing what we'd said. The prints curved left. We followed because the trees on the right had shifted closer together, trunks now too tight to pass between. Their bark gleamed wetly, reflecting our lights in dull, watching patches. When one of us brushed a hand against a tree for balance, the surface felt warmer than it should have been. The footprints grew sharper. The toes, if they were toes, ended in narrow points now, pressed deep enough to displace small stones. The heel had almost disappeared, replaced by a taper that suggested a different way of bearing weight. The joints bent forward, then back, inconsistent, experimental. And always the spacing changed when we changed. When we stopped, the prints ahead of us stopped too, the last one settling into the mud with a slow, patient sink, as if whatever made it was still there, just out of sight. The fog ahead thinned then, parting around a dark shape we couldn't see clearly. When we took a cautious step forward, the next print appeared, fresh, the soil around it still glistening. It was reacting. The realization didn't come all at once. Crept in like cold through wet fabric. The pattern was too precise, too responsive. This wasn't a trail left behind. It was being written as we watched. We tried to go faster. The forest tightened. Branches sagged lower, forcing us to duck. Roots rose, tripping us. The prints became more complex, the impressions showing more articulation, more confidence. Clawed tips emerged at the ends now, not sharp, not dramatic, just enough to suggest grasping. The path rearranged itself ahead of us, curving back toward a place we were sure we'd already passed. A broken stump reappeared on our left, then on our right. The trees leaned inward as we moved, then eased back when we stopped, like lungs expanding and contracting. Our lights flickered, not from failing batteries but from interference, the beams warping at the edges. Shadows detached from the trunks that cast them, sliding a few inches out of alignment before snapping back. The silence deepened, becoming an active thing, swallowing the sound of our steps, our breaths, our thoughts. The footprints slowed. Each new one took longer to appear, the mud holding the shape as if waiting for instruction. The joints grew more numerous. The limb suggested by the print bent in ways that implied a different anatomy altogether, something reconfiguring itself mid-stride. We whispered less. There was no point. The forest already knew where we were. Proved it by shifting again, opening a small clearing ahead that hadn't existed before. The fog pooled there, luminous and still, the ground bare except for a single line of prints leading into it. The final footprint waited at the edge. It was unlike the others. Larger, deeper, pressed with a confidence that felt final. The shape was almost symmetrical, the joints arranged in a pattern that made my head ache to look at too long. It wasn't a foot anymore, not really. It was a compromise between forms, something halfway through deciding what it needed to be. As we watched, the mud within it stirred. Not much, just enough to show that it wasn't done yet. The edges softened, then sharpened, the impression adjusting itself, responding to the way we leaned in, the way our lights traced its outline. The shape shifted toward something disturbingly familiar, echoing the way we stood, the way our weight settled, the way our own feet pressed into the ground behind us. The forest leaned closer, trees bending at their middles, branches forming a loose ring. The fog rose, swallowing our knees, our waists. The silence closed completely, sealing us inside it. The footprint finished changing. It matched us just enough to be wrong. And then, beside it, the mud began to sink inward, slowly, carefully, as if making room for the next step.